You didn't grow up in a musically inclined family.
It was musical, but not the music I do now. Just Latin American and Spanish music, folk tradition, and that. That was my musical upbringing with piano, guitar, violin, but always just to play that.
And I assume it was playing for entertainment.
Oh, yeah. Domestic, family.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of singing in Latin American countries. I mean, choirs, everybody sings. I mean, almost to this day, I believe every company, every business, every bank, they have choirs just made out of the employees, actually. So choral conductors probably have a lot of work to do in Peru. So that was my upbringing. And my mom, as a matter of fact, she directed a choir for the Peruvian Airlines with employees of the Peruvian Airlines. The turning point was when I got a job at the Opera Theater as backstage crew when I was 15 and 16, or 16 and 17, something like that. And that's when I heard music, as in official music, and mainly Italian operas. And that's how I went to the other side.
How did you go to the other side? What did you do?
Well, I asked people, and because the operas, and these are modest opera productions, I would think, in looking back. I mean, there are no videos or photos of this because we didn't have devices. But I approached people, I approached singers and conductors that would come from Chile. Wow, they would come from Chile, but that's our closest country. And so you find out information, particularly when we didn't have a school of music that taught orchestral conducting. So there was nothing in the vicinity that I could use or I can plan with. So there was this one conductor who came a couple of times to Peru, and he said, yeah, you should go and study in Chile. And Chile is the closest country to Peru. However far long, but the closest nonetheless. So I ended up going there, and that was the last year of Pinochet's regime. So there were strikes, there were demonstrations. I mean, the country was in chaos. And as a matter of fact, the following year was when they voted, to no longer continue with this regime and to turn over to democracy. So as soon as I got there, I realized I wasn't going to study there. And there wasn't a plan of study, and there wasn't the career of study. But it was there through other students that I met. Somebody showed me a catalog from the Curtis Institute of Music. And I just started reading, and I had no idea what the Curtis Institute of Music was. Mind you, this is in the mid-80s, there's lack of communication. Phones didn't exist. I mean, just to come across a phone was hard enough, or a phone line. So that's how it was. It was that brochure. And I read through and said, I'm going to go there. That was it. And that was my goal. What I did is, knowing that was my goal, now I have a goal. Now I have specifics. So I studied the whole of music in a year. Harmony, counterpoint, fugue, composition, obviously, which I came up with terrible compositions, but you have to study. You have to study how to write all these things. Music history, ear training, everything. I never studied music theory, ever in my life. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but I just picked it up as I was growing up with popular music. You actually know how to transpose, how to do these things without knowing you're doing it. So, yes, I prepared for my audition at Curtis, but I got to Curtis to do my undergrad degree. So it was a good thing because I had a platform to connect all the dots, everything that I had either improvised or attempted to do. And had not been for my teacher, Otto-Werner Mueller, who, guided me through the whole process of 2 schools, through Curtis and then Juilliard for my master's. I wouldn't be doing what I do now. I would have been completely unorganized, improvised, and most likely not successful at all.
Did you play an instrument?
The piano and then some violin, but I don't perform. I've never performed on those instruments. So it's enough to maneuver. I call them maneuver the instruments. I can sit down at the piano and reduce an orchestral score. I can accompany singers if need to be, or soloists. Violin, the mark is even gone, but certainly I can explain to you, the fingers, the shifts, and all of that. So that helped me a lot. And when I was at Curtis, then I was trained in other instruments, just to get acquainted with them, how to buzz a mouthpiece, how the fingering of the valves work, the keys on the bass clarinet, harp, and so on and so forth, which is essential, that we dig into the essence of an orchestra, and rather than just being in the periphery, looking at them. My undergrad was in conducting.
And then you went to Juilliard.
Then went to Juilliard to do my master's. Yeah, I did 2
Okay.
degrees in orchestral conducting. And when I left, I realized that I still had so much to learn. And my first job, luckily enough, was one of the assistants to Kurt Masur at the New York Philharmonic, who he was very clear, your main job here is not to put your hands on this orchestra, perhaps ever. It's to continue learning by watching how it goes, how it gets done. And that was such an invaluable opportunity for 4 years. Now, at the same time, I was conducting the New York Youth Symphony at Carnegie Hall. So I had my ensemble, and I was learning from the pros. And so in looking back, I add those 4 years, I would say that 2 degrees plus 4 years was just about right to get started in the profession. And that's how it was. After those 4 years, I had my first professional appointment succeeding Marin Alsop at the Eugene Symphony in Oregon, and then shortly after New Zealand, and it all unfolded. But it's so essential for us conductor to not start too early, because you run out of knowledge, ideas. You wear them out. I mean, if you only know, let's say, 10 pieces, if you need to program 25 different programs, you need to know 10 times as many pieces to draw from. You cannot just know that. And that's a long process, assuming that you know a piece before you choose to conduct it. You have to know a piece, really, before you choose to conduct it.
So after Eugene, you went to New Zealand.
Yes, there was a little bit of overlap. There's always been an overlap. And then in the meantime, I was appointed associate conductor of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. So this all happens in the last 4 years of the previous century. And I only spent maybe 6 weeks in Los Angeles doing specific projects. And that was it until I took the Forward Symphony Orchestra position, which then, because of the magnitude of the orchestra, the full-time season and a lot of things to direct, to plan and work on, I finished all my appointments. So it took about 2 years to wrap them up, and I was devoted only to the Forward Symphony for a long time, until the Norwegian Radio Orchestra appointed me principal conductor, which is a different position. Otherwise, doing 2 music directorships, I cannot imagine how it would be.
In general, the European orchestras don't have music directors. They usually
Correct.
have chief conductors.
Yes, which only do music. The running of the orchestra is done by the managers of the orchestra, by the administration, and there's no fundraising to be made. There's none of it because it's not needed. So you can focus just on the music. So it's a completely different profession.
When you were in Auckland, how many full-time musicians do they have? Do you know?
The full orchestra.
Full
Yeah.
orchestra, okay. Must have been a good time to become familiar with New Zealand.
So I've had great musical experiences there, which now it may be a little bit different because with internet, nobody's far away. But way back, you were far away from the rest of the industry. As a matter of fact, when I chose to go to Eugene, and not only to go to Eugene, but to move to Eugene from New York City, my colleagues and others were thinking that I was crazy because I was going nowhere. I was going literally as far away as possible. But when you fall in love with the place as well, and the orchestra, the community, the vibes, and the energy, you realize that if somebody hasn't experienced it, you can't really explain it. But I was convinced of that and moved to Eugene. I lived in a little piece of land, had 2 goats and dogs and stuff like that. And then I even went further away, to New Zealand. So you can't go any further away. So I think that also helped me that I was on my own. I was protected by being far and isolated, musically speaking. So that learning and making mistakes was less, I wouldn't say obvious. They were obvious too, but it didn't have any negative ramification anywhere because we all make mistakes when training. But right now you make a mistake and everybody knows it as the first thing. And I just don't see why should that be. But anyway, I was just alluding to before things were far, places were far. Now you're on the front at any moment.
In some ways, Auckland gave you the chance to make mistakes in a safe kind of place?
Yeah, I think every orchestra does it, and it should be mutual. I don't think orchestras really do anything about it. is the environment that does it. When you go to work, everybody's focused on doing good music. Did you ever think of anybody, God, I have to go and rehearse? Well, maybe from the sense of it's hard. Sure, it's hard, but that's what you love doing. And by the way, it only gets harder the older we get, because not because our abilities, it's because our expectations are higher every time. So if you have a great performance, you don't want to disappoint yourself by not exceeding or excelling at your craft. So you work harder, therefore it's more difficult. I think everybody should support each other, orchestra conductor at all times, because the output is what matters, which is music making to share with people.
When you were in the Norwegian radio, was it a full size, or because I read somewhere it had like 66
Right.
full-time musicians?
Correct.
Did you augment it?
No, because I found other repertoire. The only time we did something large would have been Mahler's Third Symphony, but it was together, with the School of Music Orchestra. But no, because, see, and they kept saying, we are not a huge orchestra. I said, I've done plenty of huge by now. So there's so much repertoire that gets forgotten. I mean, look during the pandemic. So much repertoire has surfaced because we didn't allow it to happen, because size and the product were connected. The bigger, the better, the better. But music is music, so I much prefer quality than quantity in amount of musicians. As long as they are good, that doesn't matter to me. But that orchestra allowed me also, again, to look on through other repertoire. Like many radio orchestras, they have their home in the studio. And in this particular case, the Oslo Philharmonic, being the neighbor, literally in the same city, who was a concert orchestra, it's a fantastic orchestra. So it really goes with the mission of every institution. So that's why I was able to do so many recording projects. And I'm talking about CDs anymore, because the format will change, but world premiere recordings. And that to me is of value, because you are making a little historic mark. When you look back, say, okay, yeah, this was the first time, and maybe with the composers around and other elements that we may not be thinking about. But we also played our concerts at the university's Aula, which is this beautiful place that has the murals by Edvard Munch. And that was the old concert hall for a long time. That's where concerts happened. That's where Herbert Blomstedt, when he was the music director of the Oslo Philharmonic, that's where they performed. So yeah, I've had a great time there.
When you did work there, did you use English?
Well, I learned Norwegian. But what happens is that occasionally there were guest players that were not Norwegians and didn't speak Norwegian. And this thing also happens in Helsinki, because I noticed, now Helsinki is one of those unique places that two orchestras live in the same building. Now with the Musiikitalo, the music house, the Finnish Radio Orchestra, and the Helsinki Philharmonic, literally. And the offices and they are side by side. So this is the only place that you run into a conductor always. Literally, the two dressing rooms are next to each other. And then I went to see Hannu Lintu's rehearsal with the radio orchestra in my break. And he was talking to the orchestra in English. And then he told me later, well, we have a few guest players that don't understand a word of Finnish, because no word of Finnish has similarity with anything else. So yeah, you even would find those things that Finnish conductors in Finland would speak in English or German.
When you were chief conductor there, you didn't have the orchestral management kind of stuff.
Nope.
Straight
to the music, programming, planning, and executing. And we did tours, we did recording projects, we did live concerts, and anything else, TV productions of literally anything. I mean, it was carte blanche. And my biggest task was, when I joined the orchestra, was to celebrate Norway's Bicentennial, the most opposite to a Norwegian, if that's such a cliche, that was in charge of looking into the celebration of the music of Norway. So because my appointment happened so far before that, it was in 2012, and this was in 2014. So I spent endless hours studying music that was not obvious. And so much that I brought to surface many things that they weren't even aware. And sometimes it takes somebody from the outside to, hey, what's that? And then like, I don't know, let's look it up. And yeah, we celebrated Norwegian music inside out in a certain way and collaborate with living composers and celebrating other composers. And as a matter of fact, one of my last projects there was to perform and record the first Norwegian symphonies. Now, certainly Grieg wrote a symphony that he discarded as not good, and Svensson wrote 2 symphonies, but there were 2 others before, by Otto-Werner. Beautiful music from the 1860s, early part of the decade. Music that hadn't been played, also because the materials fall apart and da-da-da-da-da. So I said, let's look into this, and it took us 2 years to get to it. So I was very happy to have contributed to the Norwegian music legacy. And again, those are like old composers. I mean, classical, like Stenhammar in Sweden. I mean, Sibelius also, most of his output was in the 19th century because he stopped composing. Or when I lived in New Zealand, we traded music with Australia because it was somewhat close. But I think music should be taken as items and trade them, share them, swap them, and make it part of people's lives rather than we're going to hear a concert of a list of composers. I mean, it's just one possibility. But the more we connect people with the content, it'll be almost like restaurants. I'm going to go there because I know what they cook, or I know how they cook, or I know what the chef is going to recommend is going to be good regardless of what it is.
I wonder in the U.S. if the number of composers that get programmed keeps shrinking, because a lot of planners seem to focus on what's going to fill seats, which is great, and you got to survive, but it doesn't do a lot for the growth of either the audience or, for example, the new composers.
Right. It would be difficult for me to even say something at that general level. I think we need to focus more locally, that every orchestra, every institution needs to do, first of all, whatever, as you said, will keep them alive, both financially and musically, number one. So that means there has to be a strict relation with your audience, with your customers. It's like a bakery. You bake fresh bread, warm bread, gets sold, gets eaten, you need more. So if you don't create that thing of you need more, when music is no longer the need, I think that should be the bigger question. Because you can eat a baguette over and over if you like to. You can switch to something else, whole wheat bread or gluten-free bread. So it should be more a local question, and I know that orchestras have done completely differently based on what they need. The one thing I do know is that if we stop connecting the audience with the living composer, something can happen later. We may not see it. Can you imagine if somebody would have told Beethoven or someone else around that time, okay, stop composing, we don't need it anymore, we've got enough centuries of music. Can you imagine everything that we would not have heard? So it would be a little bit of the same, probably practical. Yeah, let's stop because we have enough. But what about what we don't know that we can just stop? So it'll be somewhat like of a scientific approach or in investigative. If you stop learning, investigating, searching, well, you still don't know what will come out of that. So in the creative process, I don't think that should ever stop. So I personally enjoy working with composers because without composers, we wouldn't be doing anything. We wouldn't have this conversation or music to play and others music to hear. So we should not take that out of the equation.
Are there composers that you think should be played less in the concert hall, particularly in the U.S.?
Again, not knowing how much is too much in a particular orchestra, right? For instance, when I joined the Forward Symphony, Mahler was not in the repertoire because the orchestra was small. So when it grew, so I saw the chance to introduce repertoire. So if somebody was to look at, yeah, but they also played Mahler. Hey, for us was the first time. So it would be hard not knowing why something was played or when. For instance, speaking of the Forward Symphony Orchestra, after 20 years of being music director there, the Forward Symphony commissioned before my time Joaquin Rodrigo, and he wrote his last concerto for the Forward Symphony Orchestra, the Concierto para una Fiesta. Imagine this orchestra outside the map, the cultural map, right? So I am for try and do, and time will tell.
Are there composers today that you particularly admire?
Oh yeah, absolutely, I do. Most of them are composers that I know personally, that have grown together, at least musically. Two that I met at Curtis from my first day, literally, are Osvaldo Golijov and Jennifer Higdon. So, I mean, literally on my first day, when I was 19 years old. And then over my time as a professional conductor, I've sort of launched or pulled others such as Gabriela Frank, Jimmy Lopez, Kevin Putz, and several others then. Chris Gendel from New Zealand, Gareth Farr. Oh, the list goes on and on and on and on. Absolutely. And everybody has a unique voice. And to me, this is what interests me. Is your piece unique on its own? And that to me decides if the piece is good for me and good to recommend to others. When a piece sounds like something else, I would be the first one to say maybe you should look for another piece based on that or based on the components of a program.
Given where we've come through the pandemic and where we are technologically, what do you think the concert hall is going to be like in 10 or 15 years in the US?
I think the concert hall from the perspective of a live audience, right? You're assuming, yes. Oh, I think it's going to remain. I think it's going to, if anything, be stronger, because the one thing that no technology can replace is the human contact. Like us having this interview in person rather than through a screen, that wouldn't be the same. You can't read people's expressions, emotions on the spot. And it's multidimensional too. So I don't think that is going to change. What may adapt are things around the delivery process, meaning, when did intermissions come into existence? I hope somebody really writes about this, because I haven't found the reason why. Sometimes I think the concessions have something to do with intermissions, or how long the piece is before you have to run to use the restroom, or when did program books appear? So, and things like that. When did the concert attire get installed? You're talking about the US. So I don't know, but what I know is that it has always evolved to deliver music in a better way. And better, again, it's local. I remember in New Zealand, if the concerts didn't last at least 2 hours, with 2 hours of music or more, it wouldn't feel like we were fulfilling people's wishes to hear music. Great. There are other places in which either the attention span or the time of the day matter very much in how you deliver. Meaning, do you just do 90 minutes, no intermission or something? So you start adapting that. The content, I don't think it'll ever change, because we still have to practice and rehearse equally hard. And as long as we don't change that, then the how we connect with people is not going to change. The moment we start tampering with that, chances are that our message, because of quality or other things, may drop, and then the connecting with people's passion for music will drop. Now, I'm only answering to the music making part of it. From a bigger picture, I don't have a crystal ball. But again, my take would be work locally, because if you want people to come recurrently, then that's what you have to look at. I remember in Sao Paulo, because I've been there, over decades now, the start time had been pushed later and later and later and later because of traffic. You couldn't get anywhere. So then you adapt, you see? Or you get out earlier, or things like that. So we just have to be creative about it and continue improving it. We shouldn't use the word, let's change it. Let's just improve it.
And I think the focus on what the community actually kind of wants is an important thing. As you point out, there's no point in having a bakery that people want bread from, and all you're offering is flan, for example.
Right. Again, you do things that your community would want, but you also can do things that they would want, depending on that relationship. If there's a connection with your audience, that's how it works with your customers. I mean, the only difference, funnily enough, orchestras in the US, we know what they are not for, all of them. They are all corporations that are not for profit. Well, but that's, to me, they should say we are for impact. We are for service. If you think about it, it's a non-for-profit. It's a non-for-profit. Yeah, but what are we here for? So let's start there. Now, I can say all these things in a little more freer way because I'm not in charge of an orchestra right now. But I've seen enough that the concepts are the same. We have a product to sell. I mean, we're still corporations.
Yeah.
We're incorporated, all of us. So sure, I mean, but also companies, corporations are good or not, depending on how the relationship with your customers are. So we have a product that is music, and it should be maximized.
So you've come to Omaha. Your concentration is on an undergraduate program in conducting?
The positions instead, assistant professor, orchestra conductor. To me, as long as the music is the goal, that's number one. I've conducted enough, and I still love conducting. The reason why I decided to add a line to my work was to be old enough, to have done enough, to be able to share what I know from what I've done, including the mistakes. And to me, it was very important to do that because I cannot teach you what I don't know. I cannot teach you what I have not done. Literally, I can guess, so anyway, that's why I waited. This stage of my life was in the horizon. It wasn't planned where and how. So until the opportunity to come here came up, and still the questions, why? Why here? I said, why not? I mean, there are great conservatories already there, right? So wonderful. But I was interested in one particular thing, which was the training of conductors at the beginning level. And that's something that I know that in the US has disappeared little by little, but mainly because the generation of teachers vanished somewhat together. I mean, they retired, they passed away. And there was a gap there. And speaking with Robert Spann and Alan Gilbert, we started seeing these things in the applicants for assistant conductors, for associate conductor. There were gaps in their training, in ear training, in instrumentation. And the YouTube conservatory was taken over, and it gave the appearance that you would know more than what you needed to qualify to be a good conductor. So at the moment, I've proposed a program. It's at the college level to create a concentration in orchestral conducting for the Bachelor's of Music degree. So literally, it's in that process. However, the school gave me the possibility to use the concentration called Music Entrepreneurial Studies, because it has an enormous amount of electives, so that I could tailor that to become, in the meantime, the concentration in orchestral conducting for an undergrad program, which is what I'm doing right now. So currently, since I just started, 2 students have transferred from previous and current undergrad programs from UNT and from Ithaca. And next year I will have 4 undergrad students and 2 graduate students. So it already happened. So in other words, there is the need, and there's no one. There are 2 schools that offer it, but currently also with the pandemic, nobody has been able to jumpstart them and get them going. And so I thought that there were great reasons why here. I mean, I was checking with look at my colleagues, the faculty that can help students at that level flourish by teaching and supporting them. When orchestras are not the best, that's when conductors learn how to be a conductor. When orchestras work on their own, you're really doing much less. So there were many, many elements that I thought would fit very well here. It's early in my time. I literally just started, and because we go for short-term appointments, I really can't plan the future long terms. But I'm hopeful that 1 year at a time, I can contribute to the growth of this program. In addition, I'm also conducting the orchestra. Yes, absolutely. That's my main performing.
If you were to counsel an undergraduate student, and they say, I should do this, but what would be my goal at the end of 4 years?
The same question as any other instrument. What's my goal after 4 years of playing violin? Well, hopefully it'd be good to do what now? Continue graduate school, try to get a job. Good luck with that, depending on where and how. So the question is the same thing. but for me, in 4 years, I would say that all the fundamentals of orchestral conducting need to be absorbed into your system. So that means that when you look at the score, you know how it sounds just by looking at it. That you don't have to rely on recordings, on videos. I mean, the conductor's main job is to serve the music that you are conducting, the score. So if the score is simple, great. If the score is more complex, well, if the score is very difficult, well, you have to go according to the music that you are working. So when I refer to the fundamentals, really it addresses the conductor's most important instruments, the ears, hearing, by reading. And reading is dropping, in general, reading of anything in the younger generation. So, I mean, I can see this with my kids, teenagers, and the concept of reading. Why should it be a concept? What happened to just reading, right? So, but for us, music is reading. We read music, and then we hear music, and then in turn we can conduct. So if it doesn't go in, it's not going to come out. So that takes time. And at the same time, learning enough repertoire, or the backbone of what's the orchestral repertoire, that now you can see the horizon. So I would say that that's what you will get after 4 years. So that when you go to a master's program, then you're being a master on something that you've studied, rather than starting. Because that to me is not, there's no logic there. But again, I'm not against the terms of the academic world, because that's what you have to do. So I'm almost recreating my path, which goes to the same as I've done this, it can be done, and I'm giving the chance for this to happen if people would like to have it. And it's very uncertain. Some people say, oh, I don't know if I'll be good at this. Well, you still don't know the same thing about whatever you're doing right now, because there could be many more of your specialty. But also is the goal. Where do you want to go? If everybody wants to go to New York, London, or Paris, well, it's going to be a bottleneck. And it has been. So, but if you're open to have music take you places, again, that's also that happened to me. Music took me to Oregon, to New Zealand, to Fort Worth. I mean, every place I went, there was the same question. To Omaha. Why? And I keep saying, why? People keep asking me, why? Why not? It should be that way. So sometimes perceptions may play a role. But I'm not discouraging anybody. If you really want to be, the top conductor in New York, by all means, absolutely. You just need to know that everybody else, or a lot of people maybe think that way, but go for it. You may excel. So I like having options for the younger generation. Here are options. Take the one that will suit you best.
It does sound in ways that you're kind of recreating the path that you took. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah, and many others. I mean, Leonard Latin, John Nelson, Esa-Pekka Salonen, and we all went through this process through our undergrad years. None of it. Do you think they've all started conducting after 2 years of training? No.
Are there conductors that you particularly admire?
Oh, yes. But I have to say that the ones that I admire happen to be some that I had seen in person. Also because when you hear an audio of something, you're taking the music, right? And it's hard, to your question, admire the individual fully, because you don't see the connection. See, the conductor is the one who connects the dots. So, I mean, Kurt Masur was one of them, that he just believed in the music that he was doing. Blomstedt, Herbert Blomstedt, another one that I got to see a lot. And most of them, Maris Jansson, I never met him. I only saw him once live with the Mahler 7 performance at Carnegie Hall. That was it. I mean, you just need to see one thing of somebody to realize these are amazing artists. And then when you start looking, how did they get to do that? Nobody went there too quick. Nobody just jumped there. Because even Esa-Pekka Salonen, who also a fantastic, amazing conductor, whom I've known for over 20 years now. Yes, he did an amazing debut with the London Philharmonia when he was in his early 20s, and then he's told me this. He became who he is decades later. He told me that one time. He said, "Oh yeah, I conducted the Berlin Philharmonic when I was in my mid-20s." That was it. And what happened? Well, they were quite clear to let me know that I was of no use to them. And no wonder I haven't been there in 20 years. Now it's different, because now when he goes there, he is somebody to the music with that particular group. And that's so true. You know, you cannot be of no use either to the music or to the ensemble you're in front of. And I've gone through all kinds of ensembles, youth orchestras, high school orchestras. I conducted a high school orchestra in Philadelphia during my student years, pre-college orchestras, you know, semi-professional orchestras. You have to do it all, because then you really learn from the inside out what it is to put music together. Perhaps the most important thing at this stage in my life is to let people know how grateful I am that the University of Nebraska in Omaha has given me the chance, because they've given me a chance, perhaps to prove me wrong. I always like to put it that way, or give me opportunity to fail, because you can only but succeed, you know, and pass that. People take this for granted. Oh yeah, you can go here and there, but no, this is to me an amazing opportunity that has never happened in my life, to put things into a particular system and to give validity to my thoughts rather than just my personal thoughts. So I'm very grateful that I'm doing this here in Omaha.
One other question. Do you think you'll return at some point to being a music director?
That's a very good question. You can only return if somebody wants you to. Like, would you go and go and have dinner at somebody's home? Well, if they invite you, you can't just knock on the door, but they won't open it. So I like to see it that way. I'm not against anything that is for the better of music. And it also is very important to the time in everybody's lives. I've been music director for since 91, so 30 years. Suddenly I'm not the music director, and I don't feel that, I'm missing being music director. I still conduct. So I'm very happy with what I'm doing at the moment. So because of that, it's hard to say, if the circumstances are right and I'm helpful and it's for the better of music, absolutely. And the same if the question is, would you just like to be a guest conductor? The answer probably would be the same. I don't tend to ponder on what I don't have or what I'm not doing. An old friend of mine said, don't ponder on the irrelevant. And I started thinking about it. Oh yeah, that helps.
Right. Excellent.
Fantastic.